Caller and a gentlewoman.
Hi, you
And
never.
I didn't pay her for that, so it's beautiful, right? Communication. We're going to talk
Communicate.
about communication. What's going on with communication? Why is communication so tough?
Oh my God, because we assume a lot. We don't pause to identify whether or not what the other person said and what we heard is one of the same. And we believe that people see the world through the same lens that we do. Therefore, there's only one way of interpreting what is being said or unsaid, right? Because communication has nonverbals as well, right? Our body language, an eye roll, a stare, silence. So that's why there's so much miscommunication. It's just a lot of assumptions.
I know. Don't you just sometimes just want to grab them by the neck and say, "Listen to me, I'm speaking."
Can
But
I tell you, like, I don't remember if I've shared this with you before, and I promise, okay, I don't know why I'm going to that space, but I go on tangents sometimes, or my mind kind of connects the dots. Have you ever watched Big Bang Theory?
I used to watch that so religiously. Oh my
Okay.
goodness.
So you know how Sheldon used to say, "I'm not crazy, my mother had me tested." I was about to say, "I'm not crazy," and then that came to my mind. My mother had me tested, right? I'm not, but where I was
We need
going
to
with
be
it.
tested. Go ahead.
But sometimes when I see my clients, or even when I'm talking to my friends or I'm listening to people, I can see, I feel like the Matrix, where like you have like all that green stuff coming down, but I can see when something comes out of one person's mouth and the intentionality behind that. And then as it goes onto the other person's ears and their reaction as they are receiving it, I can see it getting lost in translation, which is the coolest thing. And I think what allowed me to create the IAP model, and even it's easier to see things when it's with others than with ourselves. And I've become a lot more aware with myself. But it's being able to see that getting lost in translation and being able to pause. That's such an important thing, right? Pause and then be like, hey, what was your intention? What did you understand? And okay, this is how things kind of got lost in translation. Does that make sense? My usual sentence. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. But what about the people who think, maybe they even feel, they're like, you know what, Patricia Terrain, my partner just doesn't understand me. He or she doesn't hear what I'm saying. How do we overcome that?
How are you saying it? Right? Sometimes is the approach. When I talk, one of the rule or one of the strategies of the intention action perception model that I think I've talked about it before is the three columns of communication. So column one is venting, say what you need to say, but not to the person. Column two is deciphering the message. So beautiful. We go from what I want to say towards the message I want the person to receive. The third part is so important, which is knowing that individual. What is the best delivery method? And if you know that the way you're doing it doesn't work, you know a delivery method that does not work, right? So it's maybe trying to figure out what does work. Like, how can you receive what I am trying to say? Because it just seems to get lost in translation a lot, and I'm at a loss. So it's having a conversation about how to communicate before I'm able to actually communicate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if I were to take a step back and say that, okay, my audience, my partner doesn't understand me. Is it that they're not understanding what I'm saying, or is it that I'm not saying it in a way to be understood? Is that correct?
A little bit of both, but yeah. It's like, whose burden is it to be clear? Is it my burden to be clear, or is it the other person's burden to understand what I'm trying to say? And I think it falls a little bit of both. It's very cultural, by the way, right? Some cultures see the burden falls upon only one. Other cultures sees that the burden falls on only upon the other. I see a reciprocity. I feel like I want to be as clear as I possibly can, and it's my burden to identify what's the best way to reflect what I'm actually trying to say. But if I don't know how you understand things, then it gets complicated because that's a barrier, right? So I need to understand how do you receive information to be able to give you the information that I want to give, and you need to be open to receiving it as well.
Is that hard for people to be open to receiving feedback on the communication that may not be healthy in their relationship?
Yes. So it's interesting because I have a couple clients that I'm working with, but there's a client that it often will express that I try talking to my partner, but my partner won't understand. And anything that I try to, when you try to give solutions and a person isn't yet ready for solution, what's going to happen? They're going to defend the problem against the solution. And what I notice is what you're telling me, it's your frustration with your partner that any solution is shut down is exactly what's being done here, right? Any solution being provided as an alternative way, like I cannot control other people, I can only control myself. So I can control how I say something or expressing what the intentionality behind it or shifting my approach and with the hope that that would be reciprocated. But a lot of the times, what I notice is that the problem with the communication is I am complaining about what my partner is doing, especially within a couple, but I am doing the exact same thing. So the two are complaining about the exact same thing.
That's actually funny because I have heard that where someone will say, Terrain, I love her, I'm with her, she just doesn't get me. And then she'll say the same thing about him. And then I asked them, I was like, do you guys realize you're complaining about the same thing? Me? No, they're the problem, right? It's not I'm the problem. Like, is that ego? Is that something else? Or is it just a blind spot in the relationship?
I mean, there's a myriad things, right? That could be it, but we have the tendency of focusing on the other. So remember how I said like it's a lot easier for me to see how the other person is the problem. I had like sessions, and so my tongue's getting twisted here now. Um, it's easier to see what others are doing wrong than to see what we are doing wrong. And that's very normal. It's a lot easier for me to work on other people than on myself. The really cool thing about the IAP that I love so much, or when I talk about anxiety management or any of the coping strategies and the concept of pausing, is that at first, when we communicate and we react to each other, the reaction is so fast that it's like it happens to us. But as I start to apply the rule of three interpretations, the three columns of communication, and I can give a brief if any of the listeners haven't heard about those before. But all of these strategies require the pause button. And as we start applying it, instead of feeling like a reaction just hit me and I just like respond back, as I pause, things seem to go in slower motion, right? Because I start to respond. So let's start by going really quickly over the rule of three interpretations. So for those who have not heard me before, the IAP model from my book, Why Are We Fighting? Intention, Action, Perception. Intention is internal to us. So only I know what my intention is. If I don't tell you, you cannot know, unless you can read my mind, which that would be really cool. But also scary because I have so many things going on. Uh, Perception is internal to the receiver or the observer of the action. The only external thing is the action itself, and the action can be the word choice, the approach, nonverbals, or so many different things. Um, when I am looking at or with the strategy that I call the rule of three interpretations, this is for the perceiver, right? The person perceiving an action. You have a fact. So a person did A, and then I have my immediate assumption of that fact. If I don't pause, I will believe that the assumption is the fact on its own, right? So, for example, if I don't know, my friend was supposed to call me, but she never called me, I can immediately think, oh my God, what did I do? She's mad at me because she did not call me. That's my immediate thought. If I don't pause, that will sound like a fact. But the rule of three interpretations requires two additional interpretations. If I go worst case scenario, let me go best case scenario. She didn't call me because she's planning a surprise party for me. So, and then a likely case scenario, she got caught up with work and totally just forgot to call me. Maybe I can give her a call instead, right? But that pause helps us go from reacting to responding. Does that make sense?
It does, because when you highlighted that, I like the example you gave. If someone doesn't do something, some people's immediate thought is to go to the negative,
Yeah, I don't
right?
know why we do that, but we do that.
Could it be that maybe some people are more, do you think it happens to people who are more prone to negative thoughts?
I mean, yes, I'll say yes and no. I do notice, I don't have any statistical, like I didn't do research on it, is I mean, empirical experience. I do notice that we have the tendency of going worst case scenario. Now, it could be because there is, of course, we're talking about the biology, if we have the tendency for depressive thoughts or anxious thoughts and all of that, but we also have environmental growing up. Was my mom always a worst case scenario person, or my dad a worst case scenario person? How did I respond to the world, and how did the world respond to me? If I have a pattern of seeing worst case scenarios, then I'll think worst case scenarios. But I will say that worst case scenarios tend to be more pronounced because they're the ones that maybe hurt most. So I had a client, this was a while back, and it was related to grief. And she had expressed to me um, being very triggered whenever there would be a phone call because she had received a couple phone calls in her lifetime that were worst case scenarios, right? The deaths of loved ones. And I remember asking her one day, how many phone calls do you receive a day? And she looked at me and was like, I don't know, like spam, there will be maybe like five, but phone calls, let's say maybe like 10 to 15 or 20 phone calls a day that I may receive. And I said, and how many of those are worst case scenarios? When you put in the totality of all the phone calls, the actual worst case scenarios may have been an exaggeration, 5% of the totality of all phone calls that she's had in her life. But the worst case scenario was so pronounced that its intensity felt like 90%. So that's why I think we have the tendencies kind of like preparing for the worst. And it goes back to the concept of defense mechanisms and triggers. Our triggers are things that have marked us, right? We've been hurt by something, so it becomes a trigger to us. A defense mechanism is created to protect us from that hurt. So if I expect the worst to happen, I'm prepared for the worst. Um, but once the situation goes away, a defense mechanism just becomes our way of life. So now I'm so used to always going to worst case scenario to be prepared that I live in that gloom and doom space. Again, my question, does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like the person who has been in survival mode their entire life because of a traumatic experience. Let's say growing up, love was always conditional. I get an A plus, I get praise. I win the baseball game, I get validation. Now they get out, now they grow up and they're adults, and it's like, oh, things are starting to go not as planned because even though I'm succeeding, I'm not getting the same attention and validation. So now you go back to that one time way back when you didn't get that shiny toy and you're like, Patricia trained, my whole world is falling apart. What am I going to do? But logically, there's no reason for that end of the world train of thought. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yeah. And so two things pop into my head, right? One is Gottman. Have we talked about Gottman here before? Right. So John Gottman. So when we talk about I said I don't have any statistics regarding the worst case scenario line of thinking, but Gottman's study in observing couples for years on end and identifying the masters and the disasters. I love how he puts that. But what he noticed was that a negative to a positive interaction is not a one-to-one ratio. You need five positive interactions to offset every one negative interaction. So our negative experiences weigh more on us. It stays more within us. That's why, like, I think we have the tendency of wanting to prepare ourselves. But if we don't catch on to what our defense mechanisms are, if I'm continuously expecting the worst from people when they are continuously showing me their best, it gets frustrating within a relationship.
What kind of impact does one partner who's always thinking doom and gloom have on the relationship then?
Oh, I mean, if we're with a person who's in that constant space, but if I am continuously showing beyond doom and gloom, right? And I'm continuously showing, hey, I'm here, I'm showing up, but the expectation is disproportionate to what's being shown without any change. At one point, the other partner will get exhausted about it, right? So I think there's a reciprocity of if I have somebody who's come from doom and gloom, who's come from a traumatic space, I will have a greater understanding of your triggers if we communicate about it. Um, but I think it becomes really important to then bring light to the times when I am doing something that's positive. So, for example, let's say that one partner grew up being silenced all the time. Whenever they would speak, they would be shut down. They've learned that nothing that they say is of interest. Now here they go and they decided that I'm going to be really educated and turn this around. And what I have to say is worth of being heard. But I still have this thing that with people in my life whom I love, not my professional life, but in my personal life, they don't listen to me, right? Well, even if I'm listening to you now, we're in a partnership and I'm listening to you, the narrative of I'm not heard can remain. For as much as I try to hear, the narrative remains. I may get frustrated. But if you are able to notice the times when you've been heard by me, then it starts to challenge, to chip away in that narrative that everybody silences me and don't listen to me. So if you and I are having a conversation and I repeat back what you said, I'm like, oh, that's very interesting. I hear you. And you acknowledge, thank you, I feel heard. That goes against your dominant narrative of I'm never heard, I'm never heard, I'm never heard. Does that make sense?
How can someone identify what their dominant narrative is so they're not being hurt in that way?
There's a type of therapy called narrative therapy that focuses exactly on that, right? What's my dominant narrative? What are the anecdotes that I tend to say to myself about myself or to others about myself? How do I usually perceive things? And it comes from a construct of our experiences. So I'm trying to identify what my dominant narrative is. Give me a minute. Let me think about that so I can try to figure that one out. Okay, so for the longest time, I've been the youngest of my entire family for a long time. 12 years later came my little brother, who's 12 years younger than I am. And then many years later, my uncle had another daughter. But for a long time, I was the only one. Um, and Freud used to say when you go back to your parents' house, like you turn a specific age. So my dominant narrative when I'm with my family goes back to I'm the youngest. Mind you, I have my PhD. I'm a 39-year-old woman. I wrote my book. I go back to that 14-year-old girl right? Because my dominant narrative tells me stay quiet, listen, everybody else is older. You're like, they don't really care for what you have to say. And I've been striving to, with my sister, is really easy. She always listens to what I have to say. She's my biggest cheerleader. But with my cousins, it's like I tend to not really talk about the things that I do unless they show interest. And this year, last year, maybe the year before, I've tried to be more intentional about sharing the things that I'm doing. Does that make sense? I need to find a different sentence. I keep on saying does that.
No, no, that's it's gonna
Okay.
it's your catchphrase. We're gonna put on a t-shirt. Does that
I
make
know.
sense?
Dr.
And start
T, does that
selling
make
it.
sense?
When you were sharing that, I began to think about my dominant narrative, and then I thought back that out of my peer group, like my, let's say, brother, sister, cousins, I'm the only one that grew up without both of my parents. Everyone else
Okay.
had both parents. So when I would get around these people, looking back now, I would automatically feel like I don't belong, and maybe I would show ways to make sure that I do belong, or that maybe I'm successful and things like that. So it was interesting when you shared that. I was looking back and I was like, wow, that's true because it does play an impact. Whereas I was like the silent achiever, where when I walk in, you can see it on me because of my energy and my outfit and everything like that. Because I felt so different. Because anytime I came around previously to meeting my mother and my father and my grandmother, who was so much older than everyone's parents, so it's obvious you stood out. So it's interesting to look back and to see how much of an impact that has on my life. Does everyone get to reach that realization, or how can we help them to reach it?
So in narrative therapy, we talk about unique outcomes, which is kind of the peripheral vision, the things that are outside that do not, that we've done or experiences we've had that are don't agree or do not validate our dominant narrative, which we often tend to just like push aside. In cognitive behavior therapy, we talk about cognitive distortion. We only let in things that fit with the narrative we're telling ourselves. So an easy example that I can give is I had a client once that struggled with depression. We were talking, using cognitive behavior therapy, narrative therapy, integrative, right? Integrating different things. Now she got a new job and she did amazingly well. It was a nonprofit. So they didn't have a lot of financial means, but they gave her a promotion. And with the promotion, they got like all their nice furniture to give her for like her space. And when she was saying that, when she was telling me that, and I was so excited for her, she's like, well, they needed to give it to somebody, right? Because in her mind, her dominant narrative tells her that she is not good enough. It's not because she is good, it's because they needed to give it to somebody. And when I did a mirroring, right, and I said, well, if I got a job at a place where they don't have like the financial means to give me a pay bump. But in lieu of that, they make sure that they gather all the nice furniture to give me to my space. What would that mean for me? She's like, oh my God, like they really appreciate you. They went out of their way to find something that they could give. And I started saying, why can you say that to yourself? Why would that be true with me, but not with you? Right? Because we distort the narrative coming in to fit with our narrative, with whatever is in here. I'll give a different example. I'm very talkative today. I came out of sessions like super hyped up and excited, and it's Friday. Okay. Um, if I think I've said this here once before, if I've never been cheated on before and my partner takes a phone call and goes into a different room, I may not look at it, not be bothered by it, or notice it, but think, it was likely the signal was bad or it was a private conversation. However, if I have a history of being cheated on, then I will likely see that behavior as now you're being sus, right? So I need you to prove to me that you are not cheating. I need you to prove a negative. That comes because of our construct of our experiences and that behavior fit into the narrative that I have that you're likely cheating on me because of what I've experienced before in spite
It's
of no actual data for that.
it's like the person that's always been abandoned and they eventually start abandoning other people because they don't want to tap into them.
I had a client. I start the sentence with I had a client a lot. I mean, 13 years in the field. I've had many, but I had this one client that one of her biggest fears was to be alone. And so when she didn't have her daughter with her, custody, so sharing custody, she would lock herself in her house and not do anything. Now, mind you, she lived really close to the beach, but she spoke her fears into reality. Her biggest fear was to be alone. So, in order to not feel rejected by others, she would just be alone. Yeah.
Isolation, I find a lot of people use that as a way to maybe protect themselves from others. Well, Patricia, you know what? Before you can harm me, I'm going to lock myself in my house so you can't harm me. Or I'm not going to communicate with you. I'm not going to ask you questions because the answer, which I know what the answer is going to hurt me. And I rather it be a fantasy than a reality. Do people get trapped between the two?
Oh, yes. The I know what they're gonna say happens all the time. And I'll say this, like I know my husband super well. We've put in the work where the way he breathes, I can tell you whether or not is a sigh of relief, is stress, is work stress, is frustration, right? I still ask because there's a chance that maybe it was something else that I'm unaware of, though I'm really sure that I know, and I can even express like, I think I know what it is, but just to be sure, right? Because I think curiosity can be very helpful. Once we fall upon the I know what the other person is gonna say, therefore I stop asking, I'm making the decision for the other person. I remember a family member, let me not, with my clients, I always say like confidentiality goes both ways because I use my personal experiences, but let me not out people here. But a family member once expressed like, oh, I wanted to ask help from my kids. But immediately when I thought about asking for help, I'm like, well, this person is not going to be able to help. And that person, like, I don't want to intrude into your life. And that person, they're going through so much. So they just didn't say anything. And it didn't give anyone else the opportunity to say yes or no. Like, allow me to say no before you say no for me. Because maybe there would have been a yes. But we become so convinced that we know the answer, and sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. And we become so convinced. Now, when we talk about anxiety, when we talk about depression, when we talk about like intrusive thoughts, they get fed in that internal conversation, right? Versus externalization, saying things out loud. It's kind of like breathing. For oxygen to come in, CO2 needs to go out. If I'm holding my breath, oxygen can't come in. CO2 is injurious to my body. Things are going to start going south. Um,
I had someone share that they're in a relationship and I guess they're at a crossroads and the person decides like, you know what, I'm gonna continue, I'm gonna work. And the person's like, okay, fine, work. Work is a beautiful thing. We need more money. But what the person didn't realize is that the person's gonna work so many hours they wouldn't be able to give time to their relationship anymore. So when the person asked that question, they're like, okay, so where does that leave us? Right? Because they weren't living together and so on. The person answered, that's a good question. I don't have an answer, but I need to work to get more money. The person said, okay, thank you for the message. They continue forward because they took it as the person saying that they don't have time, which was the person saying. The person who said that now told someone else that they're mad because the person didn't respond to their text the way that they wanted to.
yeah,
So some people were asking her, what did you want him to say?
that's a fair question. What was your expectation?
So in that example, I know that there isn't a lot of context there, but in general, do some people get in the mindset that they will say something expect you to answer it the way that they want you to answer it. And if you don't, they're even more mad, even though they're expecting bad news already.
Yeah, it's like you're setting your partner, friend, whomever up to fail in a way, right? Because I don't know, I cannot know what you're expecting from me. When you ask a question, I'm gonna answer it. Now, even when asking, I also don't know all the millions of things that are going through your mind, as you don't know what's going through mine, right? When if I am frustrated and you ask me a question, I will likely be a lot more curt, not because it has to do with your question, but because of my state of mind at that moment, because I'm feeling like that urgency and so many things and kind of overwhelmed. But we do have the tendency of doing that. In the three columns of communication, hi, we go back there. Um, the in the middle column, which is what is the message you want the person to receive, I guide you by asking three questions. And it starts with, why do you want the person to receive the message? Like, why do you want to say what you want to say? What do you want to get out of it? What purpose will it serve? And what's your expectation in return? Once you have all three, then you go to what is the best delivery method, the best way of expressing, the best approach with this individual. So when you talked about working, at one point, love my husband, he works a lot. And he is the kind of individual that he wants to make sure that whatever needs to get done gets done, right? It's not, oh, it's 5 p.m., 6 p.m., so I'm going to clock out. No, like he will go because that's the way that he is. He just wants it to get done. And at one point, because I want to make sure that he's okay, I'm continuously saying, it's important for you to set boundaries with your time. He was starting to receive my love as nagging, right? Because now I'm having to fight, like I'm having to work. I'm having to work until late. It is frustrating. And now you are like saying more things that just cause more frustration. Until one point I stopped and I said, have I thanked you for working for us, right? Because you're working to make money for us. And he's like, no, you have not. I'm like, well, thank you very much. Um, but what I also expressed was, I miss you. I want to be able to spend time with you. So could we set something up that, if something can be delegated or doesn't have to be finished now? So part of my boundaries is because I love you, but part of it was selfish, right? So he understands where I'm coming from and even what my expectation is of him, which is not to stop working crazy hours. I mean, it's work hours, doesn't have to be crazy hours, but to give me more of your time.
And that's fair. And I think most people probably agree that is fair. I think where some people get trapped is that they don't have the communication like you just shared. They expect you to agree with no information.
Yes. Now I have a remedy for that. Of course it did. It's the preamble, right? The preamble, and I'm gonna focus only on the secondary function of the preamble, which is to say what is your intention behind what you're about to say, right? So in that person who asked, I forgot how the question was, right? Like, do you need to work all the how was the question phrased?
Well, the person said that they're going to be working more hours, which is going to reduce their time together. And the person asked, "Where does that leave us?" Because it was in text. So the way it was described to me was that it was implied that the person was reducing the time that they could spend together to zero, and they
Okay.
expected the person to wait, but to wait without information and to wait in silence.
Okay. Now that can be a bit much, right? And I think in the preamble, I could express something if I'm letting you know my intention behind it is I miss you and I want us to be together. I don't believe it would be sustainable for me to have zero contact or not understand like how long this is going for. So I would really like for us to have a conversation about it so I can know whether this is something that I'm able to do, and then being able to talk about it. But it's setting, again, it requires a pause because if before I tell you what I want to say, I start to first think about why am I saying it, and I have to voice my intentionality, it requires me to think through it a little bit more than I would if I just said it.
I think that gets lost.
Yes. Now, texting. When we text, we lose the intonation. We lose if we're texting from, and we're not beside each other, so we're texting from far away spaces, which the majority of the times happens. We don't know the context the person is in, right? Some people will say, if you do not have the time to respond to me nicely, I'd rather you not respond at all. Some people will say, I prefer you be curt, then you don't respond at all because the silence kills me. But I cannot know if I don't know. Um, so a text may have just been a not well thought out response to a very well thought out question, right? And so it's taken with more weight than it was given.
I think that's what happened there.
Okay.
I think the person she probably had good intentions. She wrote the text message, which came off as her being a jerk. The person thanked her for the message, so he wasn't engaging. He didn't have an emotional response, and that blew everything up.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I get that, right? It's sometimes things are so important to us, but we don't know if the other person's in that space. I'm really big with, I go back to using the preamble. I love the preamble, where sometimes I'll express to my husband, um, hey, like this is something really important to me. Like it's not like that big. It's not like, hey, can we talk? But it's really important to me and I need to say it. Can you give me that time and attention now? So he can say yes or no, right? Because if it's something that's important to me, but the other person doesn't understand the importance of it, they will not be able to give it the appropriate attention, which will again set us up to fail.
And it goes back to what you mentioned earlier, right? Like, whose responsibility is it to have the message received in the way that they want it to be received,
Mhm.
right? Like, if I'm looking at like myself, if I say that okay to my partner, um, I'm gonna go on this trip and I don't know when I'm gonna see you. That's 100% my responsibility to clarify that, right? Because everyone's gonna be like, Trey, what the hell?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. Now, one of the things that I notice, and possibly, and I hope that not everybody goes through it, possibly because I created the IAP model, I tend to over communicate, right? Just like when we think about thinking, the continuum of thinking. Underthinking is not good. We already know, like, you haven't given enough thought, you're gonna do something, you're likely gonna hurt yourself because you haven't given enough thought. Thinking, it's beautiful. It's like you gave it thought, you know what you're doing. Overthinking can be more dangerous than underthinking because overthinking, now we start going to this parallel universe of all the what ifs, right? That could happen that are no longer necessarily based on reality, but the reality that could be, right? So when we talk about communication, under communication isn't good, but I'm learning that over communication gets too saturated. Right. So I'm learning to, like, sometimes my husband's like, I understood. You don't like, I got it. Like, next. Right. Or one of my best friends will say the same thing. She's like, I got it. And so I'm learning to find that like sweet balance, but I rather say more than less to make sure that the message was clear.
So the overthinker would be Trey's not going on this trip to work. He's going on this trip to be with whores. That's
Okay.
the
Yeah.
overthinker, right?
Yeah.
And the overcommunicator would say every single detail. At 1 p.m. I'm doing this. At 1:15 I'm doing that. At 2 p.m. I have 5 minutes. You want to talk? At 2:30 I'm doing this.
Yep.
Okay, so when an overcommunicator and an overthinker get together, it's
Oh,
chaos.
God. When an overcommunicated and an overthinker get together, I don't know. Oh, I don't know if they would be able to talk themselves out of the overthinking because they're over communicating. And so they're giving enough data to be like, no, that just ain't it. You know what I mean? And like, but how do we go back to the thinking? And it comes back to talking, to understanding how are people receiving what I'm trying to say, right? And me wanting to make sure that the things are I said are received as intended. Sometimes I'll say something and then afterwards I hear it. And like I was sarcastic with somebody and I'm like, oh, I know they'll get my sarcasm. And then I'll say it. Then right after, I'm like, oh my God, what if they don't? Holy crap. Let me like make sure that they understand my intention. That's where I go too far, right? I think that's the thinking and the overthinking. The thinking was, I know this person, they're gonna take what I say, fine. The overthinking is, oh, but what if they don't take it? So I'm trying to understand what that balance is. Uh, but it's, I guess, the pausing and figuring even out for yourself, like, why am I explaining it again? And instead of explaining it again, just asking, what did you get from this? Just to make sure it was clear.
How important is the pausing in communication, especially when we're like, oh, can I get a do-over?
Yeah. So it's so important to know that. Have you heard of the reptile brain? Okay. You know, when we become anxious or feel defensive, your body warms up, your heart starts beating a little bit faster. So we get into this space where our prefrontal cortex, which is where we do all our beautiful logic and thinking, right? It's free right there. It's great. Our body's in homeostasis. We have this little part. Oh, I don't have my book on me to show the physiology of the brain. I'm going to show it like a visualization is not necessarily what happens, but we have this little thing called the amygdala, which is that concept of the fight, freeze, or flight. Whenever we feel in danger, psychological danger through anxious thoughts, intrusive thoughts, or feel accused and need to defend ourselves, or there is actual danger somewhere, the amygdala takes over. At this moment, enough blood goes to our brain so we don't die, but our heart starts beating faster. So blood goes towards our limbs in order for us to fight, freeze, or flight. Sometimes it feels like our feet get rooted in the ground and we cannot move. You see like parents lifting cars for their kids to come out, like super strength, or you're running super fast. But you notice some people will get like their fingers may get tingly, their legs may get wobbly, but you feel really hot, you start sweating, and that's the reptile brain because you're no longer thinking, right? Your amygdala has taken over, your prefrontal cortex is no longer the one that's taken over. In that moment, you will likely say things that you do not mean and that you will regret. So it's important for us to take what people say when they are in the thinking brain, not in their reptile brain. I hate when people say, oh, when you're drunk or when you make a joke is when you're telling the truth. It's not, because that's when you don't have control of your faculties. That's when you say, so let's go Freudian in this thing. Freud talked about the superego, the ego, and the id. Our id is that innermost aggressive sexual being that's inside. You know, like the little voice in your head that you're often reprimanding? That's her id. I reprimand her all the time. I call her, and pardon my French, I call her the bitch. She really is. She's judgment. I reprimand her all the time. Our superego are our morals, are the actions we choose to take. When we get inebriated, we kind of put the superego to sleep. The ego cannot hold the id on its own, and it comes out. So nasty things will come out. When we get triggered, when we go into that reptile brain, we go into, oh, all right, we're going to hurt. I can hurt. So we'll say things that we don't mean. it frustrates me when people will express that when the id is talking, that's your true thought or your true self. I'm like, no, that's when I don't have control of my faculties. That's when what I continuously reprimand and don't believe in comes out because my prefrontal cortex, my super ego, is not in control right now. So to be able to know that the 80% of the times when you're calm, cool, and collected, that's your true you. That's what you really think. And not in the heat of the moment, the words that you said are the one that scars me the most and stay with me. They scar and they hurt. They don't have to be given the amount of power that is given to it.
I would agree with that. And I can see the other side as well, Patricia, because some people say that, well, my last five partners said these hurtful things, and they said that, well, they didn't really mean it. And to them, how do we convince them to say that, okay, they didn't mean it, but we're not telling you to always accept bad behavior when they're trying to justify it?
For sure. I think that there's something to be said about patterns, right? If I have expressed to you, hey, these are hurtful to me, and now you continue doing it every time you get into the reptile brain, that's a problem because we have had a conversation, and I believe in with awareness comes action. There is an adjustment period between awareness and action. A silly example that I can give is I was playing Yahtzee with my friends, and the cup with the dice that's in it, anytime that I was gonna like pass the dice to my friend, for some reason I would do this. And she's like, what are you doing? You don't do that. And I was like, okay, I'm not gonna do it. And then the next time I'm like, oh my God, I don't. And at first I didn't notice within the same day, right? I did it maybe two times without, or three without noticing it. When I did it again, I noticed it. I think I did it two more times where I noticed, I'm like, damn it. And I stopped midway. But then I just was able to do it without doing the whole, like, twirling the dice around. With awareness comes action, but there has to be an adjustment period given between me being aware, me starting to act, because it's first is postvention, then intervention to then get to prevention. However, if I notice that there is no effort to stop the pattern in spite of the number of times when I have expressed the hurt it causes, now it's a problem.
So let me ask you one final question, Patricia, before we close. Since you touched on that, I'm going to give you three wishes. What are three things you wish people knew about awareness and then the action?
Oof, okay, three things. One, again, it between becoming aware of something and acting upon it, there is a moment, right? So have some grace, give it some grace. Um, one of the things is that we try not to be aware sometimes because we don't want to act upon it. And lack of action is an action on its own, right? So just because I don't want to be aware, that doesn't mean I'm not aware, right? So I think that that's a number one is the adjustment period. Number two is avoiding it is an action on its own, is not lack of awareness. And then three, I think it's even the concept of pausing. When I become aware of something, if I'm able to start to pause before I continue it, it will be easier for me to then implement